Final news story of the week. And I guess we just wanted to pick up on some things that have been happening in terms of the world of platform holders turning into multi-platform developers, etc., or maybe not. Last week we were going to talk about this, but we ran out of time. There was a job posting from Sony for a senior director of multi-platform and account management, and buried within the text, they're talking about things like, "Hey, we're going to be supporting Steam, Epic Game Stores, Xbox, Nintendo, mobile. What's going on?" And then I just sort of was reading this morning this headline on WCCF Tech. Sony executive confirms that PlayStation is moving away from the hardware business towards a platform business, which is totally at odds with the kind of messaging we've seen so far from PlayStation, which is enough to raise an eyebrow, Roger Moore style. Oliver, you've been looking into these comments. I think there is obviously change afoot, because this is, ultimately the gaming business is a dynamic, volatile market, right? But at the same time, I think, things are going to change, but not dramatically so, as some of these headlines might be sort of suggesting.
Yeah. I think that these statements are kind of not really that meaningful without context here. And I
Yeah.
think when you look at this Sony job ad in particular, they could be talking about a lot of things. Sony already has games on Xbox, kind of famously. You obviously have Helldivers 2 coming out in just a couple of weeks here. You also have MLB The Show. They have titles on Nintendo platforms already. They have Lego Horizon Adventures on Nintendo platforms on the original Switch. So I think these comments in that job ad are really easily mappable onto their existing console strategy. I don't think it suggests anything in particular that's new. In terms of that kind of second story, in terms of the story about the SVP at Sony, his comments, I think it's really important to actually read what he's saying, because he's an SVP for Sony, not Sony Interactive. The question that he was being asked was not about their games business. It was about Bandai Namco and Sony's anime offerings, including like Demon Slayer and other properties. And the specific phrasing of what he's saying is really about Sony's hardware business, i.e. their TV divisions, their cameras, versus their content business, which is what, in his terms, their community-based engagement businesses. The quote, across a 200-word odd response, he only mentions gaming once, right? So he's not really talking about gaming. He's talking about that contrast between their hardware-centric businesses to their more community-based engagement businesses, which involve the gaming platform in particular here. So I don't think that's necessarily about any shift in their hardware strategy, any shift in their software strategy necessarily. But I do think that over time we're going to see Sony and Microsoft end up more often on the same side of the kind of business discussions than opposing sides of these kinds of discussions, and indeed in terms of their hardware positioning, because Sony is going to be shifting a lot of units on Xbox, not because of any particular shift in their strategy, but just through a continuation of their strategy, right? Because they're shipping games on PC. They're often shipping games with a 6-month lag, with a 1-year lag on PC. And those are their contemporary console shifting titles, like their Spider-Mans, obviously their Helldivers. That was the day and date title. Lots of titles are arriving on PC at the moment. Their Ratchet and Clanks, their Horizons, titles like this, they're major titles here. And Microsoft is shifting a lot of units on PS5. They've kind of already given up the fight. So I would expect that in that light, especially in the light that Microsoft might not be shipping competitive console units next generation in terms of their price for their performance relative to Sony's console offerings, given the different incentives of those two entities. I think this console war, in terms of the Sony-Microsoft side of it at least, is something that's going to be depressed in terms of emphasis next generation. But I don't think that comes as a result of any kind of comments in a job advertisement or comments that are being made by a Sony SVP about Demon Slayer or Bandai Namco or something. I don't really think that's the source of this. I think it just comes from the natural dynamics of Microsoft basically saying, we're kind of out of this whole console game to some significant degree. We're out of the kind of console war to some significant degree. And then Sony kind of accommodating that shift on the one hand, and also separately their shift to a more kind of like PC second, PC as an also kind of PlayStation platform kind of way of distributing their games.
Yeah, I'm in entire agreement here. And I think the whole concept of a console war at this point is a construct on social media from like, enthusiast holdouts so to speak. Because, well, let's take a look at the facts, right? Well, let's talk about the fact there's going to be a Call of Duty pack-in on a PlayStation console, right? That's kind of like just indicative of the fact that Microsoft and Sony are now actually business partners in a sense. You know, the fact that there's going to be a SKU of a PlayStation out there that has Call of Duty in it, which is, you know, a Microsoft property at this point. It's happening because it's mutually beneficial to both parties. It wouldn't have happened in the past when it was like the battle of the exclusives, and if you go back to when the announcement of the Activision Blizzard acquisition was happening, it was like, oh wow, this is all about Xbox exclusivity for Call of Duty. Actually, no, the exact opposite has happened. Secondly, the concept of all of these fantastic Xbox games moving on to PlayStation and finding incredible success. This is mutually beneficial to both businesses, right? Obviously, Xbox is getting a far bigger return on those games now. And secondly, platform fees. Sony is going to be making out like bandits on all of those game purchases. I mean, assuming it's the same sort of 70-30 cut that we kind of assume it is, this is millions of units that are being shifted on the PlayStation Store and on PlayStation discs, where Sony's basically taking a big fat cut of that. That's, they're effectively partners at this point, I would say. So, going back to that job ad where they're talking about, Xbox being a partner, I suspect it's going to go both ways simply because it has to. If Microsoft's approach is to basically align more with the PC space, which makes a lot of sense, right? Then, it's going to be incredibly difficult and indeed petty for Sony to stop PC games working on a PC just because it's affiliated with Xbox.
Right.
And at the same time, if the platform fees for the Xbox store or the Microsoft store are actually lower than they are on Steam, that's like a huge amount of additional money that Sony could make simply by embracing the Xbox marketplace. Just makes sense, right? I think, this whole sort of idea of, I mean, it's all about, it seems to be at the moment as to whether Sony's going to be adopting Microsoft's business strategy for Xbox. I don't think it is, in a number of crucial ways that you've pointed out, Oliver. I don't think they're going to be stopping their big AAA titles from coming out first on the PlayStation. But the point is that when it does come out on PC, it just makes a lot of sense to support Xbox, as it will be at that point, right? Mm-hmm. It's just kind of like everybody's a winner, really. Alex, what's your view on all of this?
I mean, it's always been a bit childish, but getting to nowadays where we see Microsoft with such a small portion of the overall console market as it currently stands, their position to pivot to fully third-party status, maybe with slight delays to when the Sony port comes, because there's actually there is a technical reason why it could take a little bit longer to port to their to their ecosystem and APIs and all that. But from Sony's side, if that main rival is gone and subsumed into the multi-platform market, then it makes sense to bring out to whatever platform they have in the future and just maximize units because they're no longer any sort of existential threat. We'll see over time what it means in regards to how PC develops with the next gen of consoles coming out, see which part of the pie it takes now that Microsoft is going to have a PC kind of thing. It'll be interesting to see if that develops in a different direction. But for now, it's just more money.
Yeah, ultimately, that's the crucial factor for these mega big corporations, which always made the whole concept of fandoms, kind of interesting and a bit bizarre from that perspective. And also like your sort of dogged sort of following of like their financial statements. That's kind of weird, isn't it? Yeah, it's an odd sort of games specific phenomena, but it's kind of strange, but quite amusing at points.